The old art hall stood as a silent witness to its long-past heyday. Once full of life, laughter, applause, and the joy of art, it was now left to decay, abandoned. In time, all that remained were ghost stories, tales of strange sightings and eerie sounds in the dead of night. They said the spirits of those who once performed in the hall never left. A group of curious young artists decided to explore the building, hoping to see for themselves if the stories were true. They hoped to discover remnants of history and perhaps find a bit of inspiration from the past. But they had no idea that what awaited them wasn't inspiration, it was something much darker and far more dangerous. Something that had long been asleep, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Andy, Dina, Dika, and their two friends, Rizal and Nia, stood before the old art hall. Its wooden doors were rotting, the paint peeling, and the large windows at the top were fogged with dust. That night, the sky was overcast, the cold wind howling, adding to the eerie atmosphere that surrounded the building. No one's dared to step in here since the accident, Rizal said, his voice filled with hesitation. Dina shined her flashlight into her face, adding to the creepy effect. Maybe there's a reason no one comes back from this place, Dina joked, but it was clear she was also nervous. However, Andy, the most curious among them, simply smirked. Come on, it's just an old building. If anything goes wrong, we can leave immediately. Consider this an adventure. The door creaked as Andy pushed it open. The sound echoed down the long corridor that felt like the belly of the building. They all exchanged glances before stepping inside one by one. Their flashlights illuminated the walls, adorned with fading paintings of past artists, now dull and lifeless. Why do I feel like we're being watched? Nia muttered, hugging herself. At the end of the hallway, they saw a door leading to the main hall. It was slightly ajar, almost inviting them in. Andy swallowed hard before stepping towards the hall. As they entered the main hall, they were taken aback by its size. A large stage with faded red curtains loomed in front of them. The soft sound of the curtains brushing the floor added to the creepy ambience. The seats, once packed with audiences, were now covered in dust, some broken and collapsed. This is both terrifying and amazing, Nia whispered. Imagine, this place must have been so full of life once. But the others stayed silent. Something felt off here. The air was heavier, colder, as if eyes were watching them from every corner of the room. Did anyone hear something? Dika asked suddenly, his face pale. They all went silent, listening. There was a sound. Like light footsteps on the stage, though no one was there. The sound grew closer, clearer, making their skin crawl. Who's there? Andy shouted, but no answer came. Suddenly, the curtains on the stage shifted slightly, as if something or someone had pulled them. Dina walked towards the stage, and the others followed. But as they approached, a soft whispering began, gentle, like a woman singing, but the tone was filled with sorrow and fear. I don't like this, Andy, Dina whispered. We should leave. Andy looked conflicted, but before they could move, a loud sound from the stage made them all jump. It was the sound of a table or chair being forcefully dragged. When they shined their flashlights towards it, they saw a faint figure standing in the middle of the stage. The figure appeared to be a woman in a tattered white dress, her face unclear, but her aura was filled with sorrow and anger. The figure stood motionless on the stage, staring at them. The flashlight beamed directly at her, yet no shadow was cast, as if the light passed right through her. "We need to get out of here, now," Dika said, his voice trembling. But as they turned to leave, the hall doors suddenly slammed shut with a loud bang, as if some invisible force was holding them. Nia screamed and tried to open it, but it was no use. The door was locked tight, not budging an inch. "What does she want from us?" Rizal asked, his voice filled with panic. "Be quiet and listen," Andy said in a low voice. "Maybe we can communicate with her." The figure began to move slowly, floating in the air. The whispering grew louder, but the words were still incomprehensible. Suddenly, the figure stopped right in front of them, and with an agonizingly slow motion, she pointed towards the back of the stage. "Maybe there's something there," Andy muttered. "We need to find out." With dread filling their hearts, they slowly walked towards the back of the stage, heading for the room she pointed at. There, they found a small door hidden behind a pile of old props. The door looked like it hadn't been opened in years, but somehow it seemed to call out to them. Andy pushed the door open, revealing a dark staircase that led down to the basement. The air that wafted up from the stairs was stale, filled with the scent of mildew and rot. "What could be down there?" Nia asked, her voice shaking. "Only one way to find out," Andy replied, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. They descended the stairs cautiously, their flashlights barely illuminating the path ahead. The further down they went, the colder it became, until they could see their breath in front of them. At the bottom, they found a small, dimly lit room filled with old theater props, costumes, and instruments that seemed to have been left to decay. But in the center of the room was something even stranger, an old, dusty manuscript lying on a pedestal. The title was barely legible, but Andy managed to make out the words, "The Final Performance." "What is this?" Rizal asked, stepping closer to inspect the manuscript. "It looks like a script," Dina said, brushing off some of the dust. "But why would it be hidden down here?" Suddenly, the whispering returned, louder and more urgent. It seemed to be coming from the very walls of the basement, surrounding them. The figure of the woman appeared again, this time hovering just outside the door. She pointed once more, this time, directly at the manuscript. "I think she wants us to finish the play," Andy said, realization dawning on him. The manuscript seemed to be incomplete, the final pages missing. The group gathered around it, trying to decipher the worn, faded text. "It's like a play," Dina muttered, "but the dialogue. It's so strange." "It's not just a play," Andy said, his voice shaking slightly. It's the story of what happened here." As they read through the manuscript, the pieces began to fall into place. Years ago, the final performance in the art hall had ended in tragedy. The leading actress, a young woman full of promise, had died on stage under mysterious circumstances. Rumors spread that it was an accident, but others whispered that it was something far more sinister, something supernatural. But the play had never been finished. The final scene was never performed. "We need to finish it," Andy said, gripping the manuscript tightly. It's the only way to lift the curse. Finish it. Nia gasped. Are you out of your mind? We can't. Before she could finish, the ground beneath them trembled, and the lights in the room flickered ominously. The woman's figure loomed closer, her presence filling the room with a cold, unshakable dread. We don't have a choice, Andy said, his voice steely with resolve. We need to perform the final scene. The group stood in stunned silence as Andy's words sunk in. Perform the final scene? Here, in this haunted place, with the ghostly presence of the woman hovering over them? But there was no turning back now. The doors were locked, the air heavy with an ominous force, and the figure was drawing closer, her gaze fixed on them. Andy opened the manuscript once more, flipping to the final few pages. We'll need to assign roles, he said, his voice trembling. It's the only way. The others hesitated, their faces pale with fear. What if something goes wrong? Dina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What if finishing the play doesn't set her free? Andy glanced up at the spectral woman, who was now hovering just above the stage. I don't think we have another option, he said. After a tense pause, they all nodded. They were scared, but they knew they had no choice. All right, Andy continued. I'll take the lead actor's role. Dina, you'll be the supporting actress. Dika, Risal, Nia, you three will handle the minor parts. They gathered around the stage, each holding the lines they had memorized from the manuscript. As they moved into position, the air around them seemed to shift. The temperature dropped even further, and the faint sound of an audience, the ghostly whispers of those long gone, filled the room. Andy took a deep breath and began to speak the first line of the final scene. His voice echoed in the vast, empty hall, mixing with the eerie sounds around them. Dina followed, her voice shaky but growing stronger with each line. As the scene progressed, the ghostly figure on the stage watched them intently, her expression unreadable. But as they neared the end of the scene, something strange happened. The manuscript in Andy's hands began to change. The words shifted and twisted, new lines appearing on the page that hadn't been there before. What is this? Andy muttered, his eyes wide. The script. It's rewriting itself. The group froze, their eyes fixed on the manuscript as the ghostly whispers around them grew louder. The audience, the spectral figures that had once been silent now seemed to murmur in unison, their voices blending into a haunting chorus. The air was thick with tension, and the temperature plummeted even further. Andy's hands shook as he read the newly appeared lines. I don't understand, he whispered. This wasn't in the script before. Dina leaned in, her eyes scanning the fresh text. It's the final lines, she muttered. The lines she never got to perform. Nia stepped forward, her face pale. Do we say them? We have to, Andy said firmly, though his voice wavered. This is the only way to finish it. With trepidation, Andy took his place at center stage, the final lines of the play burning into his mind. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, the lights in the hall flickered wildly, and the whispers became deafening. The ghostly figure of the woman on stage seemed to shimmer, her form growing more defined, more real. This is her moment, Andy whispered to the others. We're completing her story. One by one, they recited the newly written lines. As they spoke, the room grew darker, the whispers turning into wails, like a chorus of lost souls crying out in anguish. The woman on stage began to move, her ghostly form twirling slowly, as if performing a dance that had been long forgotten. The final words were upon them now. Andy, his heart pounding, spoke the last lines with all the strength he could muster. The room fell silent, the whispers stopping abruptly. The ghostly woman halted her dance, standing motionless at the center of the stage, her gaze fixed on Andy. And then, she smiled. The smile on the woman's face was one of relief, but it was also unnerving. Her expression was a mixture of gratitude and sorrow, as though the completion of the play had lifted a great burden, but the pain of her past lingered. She slowly turned to face the empty seats in the hall, as if acknowledging the ghostly audience that had watched her unfinished performance for so many years. And then, she took a deep bow. The air in the room seemed to shift once more, the oppressive weight lifting. The temperature slowly began to rise, and the whispers once so eerie and unsettling faded into nothingness. She's gone," Nia whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. But Andy wasn't so sure. "I don't think she's gone," he said quietly. "I think she's finally at peace." As they stood on the stage, unsure of what to do next, the lights in the hall flickered once more. But this time, it wasn't the ghostly presence that had caused it. Instead, the old wiring of the building seemed to be coming back to life, as if the performance had awakened something within the very walls of the hall. Rizal tried the door again, and this time it opened without resistance. They were free to leave. "We did it," Dina said softly, her eyes glistening with tears of relief. "We finished her story." But Andy still felt a lingering sense of unease. The script, the way it had rewritten itself, it felt as though something else was at play here, something they couldn't quite understand. "Let's get out of here," Dika said, breaking the silence. "I've had enough of this place." In the days that followed, the group tried to move on from the events at the old art hall. They spoke little of what had happened, each of them haunted by the memory of the ghostly woman and the strange manuscript. But the hall itself seemed different. Word began to spread that the eerie sounds that had plagued the building for years were no longer heard. The ghostly whispers had ceased, and the building, once a place of fear, was now quiet, almost peaceful. One evening, Andy returned to the art hall alone. He stood outside, staring up at the windows where the woman's figure had once been seen. The building looked different now, less imposing, less haunted. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. A small, folded piece of paper tucked into the crack of the door. He unfolded it, his breath catching in his throat as he read the familiar handwriting. "Thank you." Andy smiled softly, tucking the note into his pocket. He didn't know who or what had left it, but he felt a strange sense of closure. The woman's story was finally complete, and so was their part in it. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the art hall still held secrets that might never be uncovered. The group never returned to the old art hall after that final night, but the memory of their experience lingered. They had faced something otherworldly, something beyond explanation, and they had lived to tell the tale. Years later, the art hall was restored, its history preserved as part of the town's heritage. But despite the renovations, the stories of the hall's haunted past never faded. Visitors would often claim to hear faint whispers, or see fleeting glimpses of a woman in white dancing on the stage. Andy, now an established artist, would occasionally tell the story of that fateful night to close friends. He never embellished the details, nor did he try to explain what had happened. Some believed him, while others dismissed it as nothing more than a ghost story. But Andy knew the truth. The old art hall had once been a place of joy, talent, and creativity. And though the woman's spirit had found peace, the echoes of her final performance would forever linger in the shadows of the stage. If you ever find yourself in an old theater or an abandoned art hall, be mindful of the silence. Sometimes, it's not the absence of sound you should fear, it's what lingers in the quiet moments, waiting for an audience to witness its final act. You never know whose story you might be finishing.